welcome back to another episode of
Just
a
a
squirrel
squirrel
looking
looking
for a
for
nut,
a nut,
trying
trying
to get out of
to get out
this.
of this.
Right?
Okay, Oleg,
Honest,
you just
that's
played
on me.
around with us. Now we know how to do this just fine. But we do have one of our regular new squirrels in the house tonight, Trip Bodenheimer. Welcome to the show, and it's good to have you back. And we knew that it would be a little bit of a tumble with you here because anytime you add a new element into any sort of ritual, then the unexpected occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And
This
you
is
brought
back-to-back
some
weeks.
of that. What'd you
back
say?
to back with the unknown thing here.
Back-to-back weeks. I did something right.
Exactly. And it's great having you. And we are looking forward to having you on a regular basis, as we know you will be and as already you've become. So how did it feel, guys, being wrong, getting that completely screwed up? Did it just make you giddy with joy?
I take the blame. I was the new person here. I'm the third wheel. So I was the one. Last week, y'all were flawless.
Blame. Your fault. Have you ever seen The Handmaid's Tale?
Mm-mm.
No, I haven't.
Oh.
I see it on there all the time, but haven't watched it.
That's what they love to say. If someone's been a victim of something, everyone points at them. Your fault. You always get to blame the victim and the
I was gonna blame
perpetrator.
Oleg.
Oleg. Let's just bully Oleg.
Let's do
that's
that.
not very nice. I think for me, I'll say this: it felt actually good to be wrong, according to whoever set that standard to begin with. But it felt like there's some sort of newness. I don't know. I just made up a word. There's a new element to it all, and I enjoy that. I enjoy that curiosity. I enjoy kind of going back to not square one, but going back to how Scott and I started this show.
Wrong.
Yeah, how many times it took us to be able to get to this point just so we can actually read the words at the same pace. I remember the transformation we have had through it, so I'm glad that we were able to relive the moment in a way.
Exactly.
It's a very nice way of telling me that I messed everything up.
We weren't harmonizing ourselves. I was observing that. Now, I'm going to change the subject a little bit. It is popular in self-improvement, entrepreneurial business space to say, I lean into being wrong. I fail over and over because every time I failed, I'm closer to getting something right. But it reminds me of a song that was popular in the 1980s by a group called Men at Work. Men at Work, for those of you who may not remember, Oleg, you sang some songs about living in a land down under, and they were asking themselves, who can it be when a stranger was knocking at the door? They had some cool new wave songs. Trip, I think you might be remembering them. But, maybe you don't. You're too young.
Kind of.
So I hate you even more. But in any event, but you're not wrong for being born when you were. In any event, there was a song that they sang. And basically the theme of the song was there were some leaders that saw some lights go off on some screens on some radars and decided to push a series of buttons. The next thing you know, the United States or the West NATO had bombed Russia into smithereens, and they had retaliated, and there was a worldwide nuclear war. And the leader that pushed the bomb sang the chorus of the song. It's a mistake.
Mm.
Do we always really enjoy being wrong?
That's a good question. Maybe
The
in
world's
circumstances
destroyed.
like that, maybe it's slightly different. I've actually have the two of you seen Chernobyl?
Yes, that's actually what I was thinking of when Scott was telling us.
That was one incredible story. Obviously based on real life circumstances, but for anyone who hasn't seen it, I think it's on HBO. Is that right?
Yeah,
I believe so.
Yeah,
well,
but
it's really one of the best miniseries ever made.
Oh yeah, I think it's definitely up there. And what I realized, or I guess watching it then and then kind of reliving the moment right now through this particular topic of do you enjoy being wrong? That is a set of circumstances that I would not enjoy being wrong because, well, a variety of reasons. A, just not knowing myself how it would turn out, and B, not knowing how it's going to impact people in that time frame, as well as the people for what multiple generations from when it took place.
Yeah.
So it's that is a situation where I probably would not enjoy being wrong, and that would be a hard set of circumstance to reframe and really create a different narrative around, especially if I was the one that I was responsible, or
So
that
I
I
want
knew
to,
that, like, the emergency buttons didn't work the same way, but like I continued to pursue under whatever the orders that were given. So
yeah.
that's
Or if
a
you
different
knew
set of
telling
circumstances.
the Russian people that there was nothing wrong, the people
Hmm.
that were standing on the bridge, all of whom, according first of all, just as a point of information, I did some research on that miniseries after it was over, and it's based on 2 books. One of which was the autobiography of the woman who played the wife of the firefighter.
Oh
Vasily, I
wow.
think was his name. And everything in the movie pretty much was true to her account, including the fate of her husband and her baby. Even some of the details at the beginning when they had a friend, I don't remember his name. He was another firefighter who touched the granite.
Hmm.
Yep. Yep.
Right? Like that was literally a word for word taken from her account based on the other firefighters that were there that day of what happened.
Hmm.
And so it's actually it is a truly good point about being wrong. The whole parts of this show where the local Communist Party didn't want to have this exposed, or they didn't really believe it, they were wrong, and they kept people living there, or the people that were on the bridge. Apparently those people that were on the bridge watching it, they all died. And that bridge has a name to this day. And the people that died on that
Hmm.
bridge, like they're called the bridge people or something like that. They're all remembered for being wrong about the
Hmm.
risk of standing on that bridge that horrible night. I do want to say hello to Melody and to Jessica. Knowing both of you has not been a mistake. It's not, you are not wrong when you say I look fabulous tonight, Jessica. That you're in particular right about. And go ahead and blame you. I'm just a poor soul in the comments. Jessica, that's wrong. Don't talk like that. Jessica would also, as being a little bit blunt here, I would be so bold as to say that no one really enjoys being wrong, even if it's something that will change our life for the better. That we're being wrong, we still have to eat some humble pie, for several reasons, and I agree with that. And then Melody, it's again so good to see you, Melody. We may not enjoy being wrong. It's a learning opportunity. And then Melody is saying, wow, I suppose, to the things about Chernobyl.
Yeah.
It is a learning opportunity, but is it really all the time? Like if you're a smoker, I won't use other examples that I could, but if you're a smoker, and I'm not judging anyone that is a smoker, because my mother was a smoker for many years, but if you're a smoker and you get lung cancer and it's metastasized all over your body and you're dead at age 65, oops, I was wrong. Is it really a learning opportunity at that point? Or the example that I always give of the subway riders in the 1990s. And I'll just share that example again because I don't know that everyone's heard it, but it was this hobby people developed in New York City in the 1990s where teenagers would hop onto the car of a subway. There was a Wesley Snipes movie, I think, called The Money Train, where they did that. So they copied them. And they would get on the top of the subway and ride in the tunnels, not knowing that the movie had left out that there are these concrete slabs that hang down up into the very, very top of the subways. And so you're riding on the car of the subway and you run right into a concrete slab. What is there to learn?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, in terms of being wrong, I think if there's some takeaway in terms of, well, I think one, in terms of who it impacts. If I'm talking to you about, what year a Men at Work song came out and I'm wrong, I'm totally okay with owning that. But if it was something, to the extent of like a, catastrophe and all these people have lost lives, or it's something that there's really no turning back on, and it's something that you learn from it, but it's at the casualty of others. I think that's where, I mean, it's hard to say, oops, I was wrong on that one. Because I do believe wrong, just as Melody mentioned, is associated with learning. I believe, we try to be perfectionist day in and day out. But if you look back at it, some of the most traumatic experiences in our lives where we've been wrong or where we may have done, some sort of screw up, we've learned so much from it. It's where you typically hear people say, trust me, I'm never going to do that again. I learned my lesson.
Yeah.
I think it's the severity of the situation.
Well, I'll also kind of tag on to what Bodhi, what you just mentioned, and play a little bit of a devil's advocate regarding Scott's comment. I think in those situations, what I've personally learned throughout my life is that in many instances where certain problems could be avoided just through lived experience of other people, what I've learned is that in many of those situations, many people look at it as, unless it's a problem for me, it's not really a problem. And
Is that wrong?
I don't. That is a great question. That is a great question. I think part of the reason that I would say it's a great question because I guess in my case, I would only say it's for me, it would be wrong if I knew the consequences and I was able to see it, but I'm also in a different space, and I'm not saying I'm any higher or any lower than anyone else. I have this level of awareness. So I think for me, it would be in a way wrong to accept that, in knowing that, okay, X number of people have done this and this was the consequence. So why would I do that? So, and I think that could be applicable to many different areas: drunk driving, many of the situations, or smoking cigarettes, the things that we've just discussed. So I don't know. I guess for me, the other question that I have within that question is, who gets to decide that? Who ultimately gets to decide what is considered right or wrong in a situation like that?
Well, Melody actually, in her very last comment, kind of gave us an answer, at least a proposed answer.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that undermines social cohesion. Although I don't know that Melody
But everything
would really
doesn't
even
have a
go
fine
that
line,
far.
though.
What'd you say?
Everything doesn't have a fine line. I mean, think about what we're going through right now. Not to get extremely into this topic, because I feel like we've talked about this whole vaccine and mask like every episode, which is fine. It's part of our everyday lives. It's cool, to be able to preserve this moment of human history, I suppose. But at the same time, it's like that's not necessarily a fine line for many people.
Yeah,
So, like,
mask or without
who's right
mask,
or
both
wrong in
sides
that?
are looking at each other like the other are wrong.
Mm-hmm. So how do we determine that when the argument could be made that one is supposedly putting other people? You could even argue that a greater majority is being put at risk. So, like, where do you determine, and how do you determine?
First of all, Jessica, I don't want to leave your 734 comment aside. I'm holding on to that. We're gonna move on in the conversation to address what Melody raised right now, but do not think that that's going disregarded, because there actually is a lot in that would be wrong. And there's a lot, especially when there is a lot to really unpack there, and you brought some vulnerability to the table, which is very much appreciated. So I would argue that there are such things as universal ethics, and that determines what's wrong or not. And universal ethics are when you are truly weighing the interests of all stakeholders in a situation when you are making a decision about whether something is right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that failing to weigh the rights of other human stakeholders at a very minimum is an act of wrong. And so one can draw some pretty significant ethical conclusions from that, if that is an ethical framework that you choose to follow through with. And so that goes, for instance, with I don't remember, I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes, U.S. Supreme Court Justice, who said, freedom ends when your fist is coming to my nose. And what he means is that, for instance, if your principal framework that you are, or your principal value that you're pursuing happens to be freedom, well, that's okay until it impacts another stakeholder, particularly the person you're punching. Or if you are Typhoid Mary during an earlier pandemic and are working without protecting yourself and without quarantining and all that sort of stuff, and getting tens of thousands of people sick against their will, and without giving them the authority or the autonomy that they need in order to make a decision about their own health, well, then per that line of reasoning, you are acting unethically. You are wrong. And to me, that is what I'm taking from what Melody says. Now, I'm not a professional ethicist, and Melody, by the way, if I'm getting you wrong, by all means, don't let me misrepresent you and be
That's
wrong.
the good thing
myself.
about the shows. We can mess up the whole time.
We totally can, and we're really good at it. Now, that's not the only ethical framework within which people operate, but the problem with many of the other ethical frameworks is that they, if applied, can lead to even contradictory ethical outcomes, where at least a system like that leads to consistent ethical outputs.
Okay, so then that brings up another point. Let's say that is a more of a clear path towards a particular thing. Let's say if the topic is healthy compared to unhealthy eating. How do you determine that? Because there's clearly an impact that's being made.
There is.
Indirect and direct. Direct
There
impact
is.
to your body, indirect impact due to the influence that you have on other people by the set of behaviors and decisions that you have chosen to be acceptable. Therefore, you create the possibility in someone else's mind as things that they can also do.
The response to that would be that we, if we're behaving in a way or justifying our actions in a way that is harming others, the only way to rectify it is to take true ownership of that and then to do everything that you can about it. Now, there are people that have a whole bunch of metabolic issues and a whole host of deprivations, or maybe they live in a food desert, or a whole host of things that can go into their quote unquote decision to eat healthily. And there is some controversy at the margins about what is healthy or not. But for instance, I'll use this as an honest, candid, and vulnerable example here. For many years as a weightlifter, and because of, just being a lackadaisical attitude, I ate in a very unhealthy way. I ate lots of tuna and chicken, which helped me, with my weightlifting and exercise and everything. But I also ate tons of rice. I ate tons of bread. I ate tons of desserts, sorbet, ice cream.
Just carbs.
Right. Carbs. Because I liked it, because it tastes juice. I was the king of juice and juice smoothies, all this sort of stuff. And it was unhealthy.
You got to take me to the best spots in New York when I'm around, Scott.
Yeah, I don't even know them anymore because I abandoned that lifestyle so long ago. Why did I abandon it? Because I started to have blood glucose problems, serious ones because of that. Even though I was strong, I was in the prime of my life, all that sort of stuff. And these blood glucose problems led to some serious concerns about my health. One could say, well, that's just me and my health, but it's not. It's two other stakeholders at a minimum that are involved. Actually, three. One, there was my husband, who was being dragged into whatever might happen to me because of my health, whether I liked it or not. So my freedom to eat whatever I wanted, put whatever I wanted to in my mouth, could have an impact on him. What if I became ill? What if I became incapacitated? What if I died? He would have to live with all of those things. Number two, there were the other stakeholders in the insurance system that I was part of. Other people that would have to pay more in premiums, or whose premiums might go up because of the actuarial influence of my actions on the cost of my medical care that is spread out through the entire insurance pool. So that's not just me. And then there would be the impact of those who are in the hospital system, who might have quicker access to health care, or who might have better care or more focused care because I wasn't in the hospital because I was being more careful about what I was eating. Yeah. And so if you look at it, I have to say that by not considering the other stakeholders, even those that are remote to me, because they're just as human as I am. I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did not enjoy being wrong. I was, as both Jessica and Melody have said, I learned from it. And my life, since that time many years ago, has changed much, much for the better. But thinking about things like that, even things that sometimes appear to be victimless ethical quandaries, actually aren't if we think about them.
Mm-hmm.
What about taking it a step further than just like eating, but what you were talking about earlier, Scott, where, let's say I go visit my mother. My mother loves to sit she's probably not listening right now. So she likes to sit on the back porch at her house, drink some wine, talk on the phone, and smoke. When I go visit her and I see her smoking, am I wrong for not correcting her on that?
That's
First
a
of all,
really good
actor.
question.
I'm sorry. I just have to say, Mark McCracken. He's an actor in LA. He's incredible. He's very funny. Mark, that's why I love you. Just say. Okay.
But that is a really good point, though, Bodie, because I personally have felt. I mean, I've felt this way many times, and I think even outside of those circumstances that you described, where I would see someone's lifestyle not directly fit with my lifestyle or the way that I view the world, and I found myself in a similar dilemma as far as how do you tell this person what you're observing and how you're observing it, while at the same time not wanting them to feel like they've done a series of wrong decisions, because I know that's also at the core of where I'm at. Like, I don't know if you can relate every time that situation happens. I would actually be curious, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you process that every time you walk in? Not every time, but
she tells me she's supposedly she's stopped smoking for 30 years now. And that's the first time but I always tell her, I'm like, that's wrong. It's not good for you. I'm just trying to look out for you. And she's like, I know. Thank you. But am I wrong for just taking that, for just saying, all right, so what are you up to? So like,
yeah.
Well, here's the challenge I'll give you on that. What if you get lung cancer due to secondhand smoke?
Exactly.
And people who love you, the singer I love, Donna Summer, died of lung cancer. Now, no one really knows what caused it, but it was a fact that during the last 30 years of her career, she was performing in casinos around secondhand smoke left and right. And Mark, by the way, I wasn't making light of your point. Actually, I do tend to agree with it, but the way you frame it, and it is a humorous way to me to phrase it. And
Robert Palmer too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the pushback that I have on that. That, again, your actions are potentially holding consequences for others. Jessica, though, does raise a good point about smoking. For instance, I read recently that Hitler quit smoking in
I have read that.
Yeah, in the 30s or 40s before anyone else did, because he believed it would cause cancer, and everyone laughed at him. Everyone thought he was a nut. Well, he was a nut, but not about that.
Yeah. I also read, or I've seen, and Scott, you are more educated in this field than I am, because I just know a very minimum of it. But I remember when I was watching, I might have been reading, I think it was either I was watching a documentary or reading something where similar thing that was described, where he not only quit smoking, but I could be wrong, but I think he was doing like a form opium, something like
I
that.
was going to say opium.
And then after a while, his hands started shaking really bad, to a point where he could no longer like show it to many of the people that he was meeting, who were fighting at different fronts. And so, like, those situations, I don't know. It's an interesting position to be in. I like what Melody had said here.
Yeah.
And that is, you can suggest, but you can't decide for them. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I don't know if the two of you subscribe to this theory, or Jessica or Melody or Mark or anyone else that's tuning in, but I can perceive certain things as problems, but they may not necessarily be problems for the other person or the other group. So unless it's a problem that they recognize, who's right or who's wrong. If it's not a problem for you to show up late, does that make you wrong?
I don't believe.
What if you're accustomed? Or what if that's something that's just, I don't know. What if that's your routine?
I personally reject the idea that the ethics or the morality of a situation is governed purely by its outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is ridiculous, because that is meaning, again, that's sort of leading to contrary ethical. When you're making a decision, whether it's ethical or not, you could come to completely different ethical decisions based on the exact same action. All totally dependent on what you personally think the outcome will be.
Mm-hmm.
Melody, you shared that about COPD. That's
What does that stand for?
Melody, I don't remember what it is. It's a lung disease. I know someone that suffered from that for a long time, and pulmonary. I don't know. I'm sure Melody knows herself, but it's a lung disorder.
Chronic inflammatory lung disease.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you, Trip. And then Jessica, I'm also glad you survived putting on the performance for your mother about smoking. I'm really glad, because the world needs people like you in it. And that would have been wrong for her to kill you. Or maybe not.
Yeah. According to some laws, yes, that might not pass. I'm curious though, because we've kind of touched upon another topic, and in fact, I think this is how we even started this conversation with the whole Chernobyl reference. When it comes to telling your story, or when it comes to telling information about who you are, so like in that case, if the directors of that film, let's say, misrepresented the actual events and told a different story, or over dramatized some of them in order to get more of an effect, more of an audience, more money, more revenue. I'm curious, in your guys' cases, when you are misrepresented in a variety of situations. I mean, Trip, you teach a lot. I'm sure you get introduced quite a bit as far as, please welcome blah blah blah, he's doing this. Scott, the same exact way. Whenever you're on public stages, when you are misrepresented in those situations, how do you process that? Do you look at that person as being wrong?
Well, I believe it was Mark Twain who said, "Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story." But no,
it better be good.
I remember that.
Yeah, I remember that when both of my names are mispronounced.
Yeah, anytime. So if it's like a story or something, if it's a story that I know something's been misrepresented, I'm like, no, that's not accurate. Usually I'll tell them like to the side or something. I'll say like, hey, that was incorrect. But if it's something, like introducing me or something, if I feel like it's, not of any harm to me, or if it's not they had no ill will, usually I just kind of let it go. But if it's something that I feel like is, an audience needs to know, like it's beneficial, it's some sort of concept or something that they need. I remember when I actually, I think it was my very first class I was teaching. I went up to go teach, and I gave some information that was pretty important. It was about like sexual assault, and gave the information out to the students. I walked outside in the hallway with my trainer. My trainer pulled me to the side and he said, you're gonna have to go back in there and fix that. You told them the wrong information. And I was like, oh my God, this is my first class. If I go in there and tell them I'm wrong, my credibility's shot. They're not going to trust me anymore. They're going to think I'm an idiot. And sure enough, I went in there, and I could have blamed it on the curriculum writers. I could have blamed it on my trainer, because he wasn't in there with me. He left me alone to go back up there. But I owned it. I owned up to it and said, hey, I just want to let you know I messed up on something, gave you the wrong information. And we build this narrative in our head when that happens, that people are just going to like rebel and start throwing stuff at us and booing us, and we're going to have to leave the room. But they actually told me that it increased my influence with them throughout the rest of the course by showing me that I'm human, I'm real, I'm vulnerable, to get up there and do that. So yeah, I think it just depends on what it is. I think if it's something that they need to know, but I think if they pronounce me from, if they say I'm from Columbia, South Carolina instead of Lumberton, North Carolina, I'd probably let that one go. But what do y'all think?
Mr. Mason?
I'm kind of with Trip on this one. If it's minor, or if it is understating my qualifications, whatever. Like if some of these government titles I have had, it's very difficult for people to understand, or they may type it wrong or whatever. And they're so long and obscure, and it's not like anyone is going to remember actually like what my title was in 2011 through 2012 or something like that.
Mhm.
And so, right, like what's the magnitude of the error? And I don't want to embarrass someone. And in fact, if I'm like picking, no, actually in 2011, my title was First Deputy Executive Officer, Chief Executive Officer, not First Deputy. Like, I'll look like ridiculous. But if it is overstating my qualifications particularly significantly, and if it's a minor overstating, like sometimes I've had people leave off the word commissioner or assistant commissioner when they've given my name in a podcast. I might talk to them about that later. I don't necessarily do it in the moment, interrupt everything, but I want to make sure that the record is clear, because that's kind of lying about who I am, and I don't want to misrepresent myself or be dishonest that way. And I agree. There have been times when when I was younger, I was raised in a family where punishment for mistakes was swift and severe, to say the least. So I was afraid of my reaction was maladaptive. I was afraid of being exposed as having made a mistake because I was afraid of over punishment. As I matured and realized the whole world wasn't my family, then I began to learn to just, suck it up and make the mistake and admit it. People do respect you more. At least you feel better about yourself. You don't have to crawl back later exposed as having lied.
Yeah.
Which is how people can interpret that.
Well, I will say, I'll say two things. So first, having lived in not similar circumstances, but similar in the concept as Scott that you just described, maybe even you, Bodhi. I don't know that much about the early childhood experiences that you went through, but for me, living in the orphanage for 3 years, I mean, talk about being wrong and facing punishment. That was literally above all else.
I can't
That was the number
imagine.
one thing that you literally, as someone who was living in the circumstance, that was not even something that you could fathom what would happen. So being wrong when it came to not doing the chores properly, let's say missing corners when you wipe the floors, not performing well in school, all these other things, you paid serious consequences for it.
Yeah.
So that is a situation, I think, where being wrong, I would not have enjoyed, just because the punishment was so severe. The other thing that Scott, you mentioned, as far as gaining a level of respect and credibility, that's a situation where I have learned that it actually kind of did the opposite of that while living there. Because in situations when I was wrong, let's say, for example, I was responsible for cleaning one of the rooms that day. And part of cleaning that room, it included dusting the surfaces and included mopping the floors. So you'd have to get under the bed and mop the floors and everything. And that was your duty. The entire day you had to keep that particular room clean. So in a situation, which has happened to me many times, where let's say I desperately wanted to go outside and play with some of my friends. So I would cut the corners a little bit. Instead of going all the way under the bed, I would spread the towel and, just wave it around on the floor just enough so it would get some of the surfaces wet. So when the person's checking, they typically didn't go all the way under. They would just lift the blanket, kind of move their hand around, and if it's wet and if it didn't show any dust, then passed. Well, a couple of the times I got caught because the person actually moved the bed, physically moved the bed to see where it was wiped and where it was not.
Was my dad working at your orphanage?
So that
where
is
he
a
was.
situation where respect and credibility were lost instantly. So that's one of those where I think, kind of going back to Bodhi's situation, yes, I have been in those cases where I was able to admit myself being wrong in public and gain credibility, gain trust. But at the same time, having lived in the other circumstances, man, that is something I think many of the people can relate to who have lived in my circumstances. They know that being wrong in that case there really was no learning opportunity besides the fact that you had to get it right.
And when I talked about punishment being swift and severe in my household, I'm sure it wasn't to the same degree as in the orphanage. I want to make that clear. But yeah, that's where
It's
this
intense.
whole
Yeah.
that fear of being wrong and the mentality around covering it up or pretending it didn't happen or someone else doing it or blaming other people. That's how that sort of thing arises, and goes as to something that I feel pretty strongly about with regards to leadership generally. And this is a Scott Mason cliche, but I will hold on to it, which is that anytime your actions impact the lives of others, you're acting as a leader.
Mhm.
So that means if you are walking down the street and you are bumping into people randomly, you're impacting their lives. You're being a leader. You're showing the world an example of what you believe behavior is that someone may choose to emulate. And leadership, to me, to be truly effective and to bring out the best in whatever is being led, requires that transparency, it requires that openness, that ability for people to say, I'm wrong, so that mistakes can be made. Going on a little bit of a tangent here, Joe Bogdan, who is a friend of all of ours, introduced me as a guest on my podcast to someone named Cole Pasley, who was an IED dismantler in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he led teams that did that. And during the interview that I had with him, one of the most powerful things that he said was that you learn as a leader to admit if you're wrong. Because if someone is saying you're wrong about the way you are dismantling that bomb, you and everyone else can blow up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The consequences of being all egotistical like that from a team perspective are very clear and immediate. And that's something that I think is well taken into civilian life as a leader, but we don't, in no small part because of organizational cultures or familial or childhood circumstances like those you're describing, Oleg, that promote this sort of I have to be right or else attitude.
Mhm.
That's what I
Bodhi,
was thinking of
have you
when
ever had to
Oleg.
lead anyone into combat?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah. Mhm.
Just a classroom. Just a classroom.
Could
But
be
some
critical
classrooms
combat.
have felt like combat,
Mhm.
depending on the topics that have come up. But no, you were saying something, Oleg, that sparked something in me, and it's almost like society in general, just like in terms of school. You go to school as a kid, do they praise you for learning from a mistake? If you mess up on something, if you do something wrong, they praise the good grades. And Bill Gates said, success is a lousy teacher. And I messed up a lot in grade school all the way. And then even going to the Bodenheimer house after school, there were chores, hobbies, chores, homework, all kinds of stuff that was expected of me. And if I came home and something wasn't done right, it was punished. And that's just how it was. But in hindsight, looking back, yes, I learned a lot from those mistakes. But I think it's something that, failure needs to, I think, be valued a little bit more than it is, now depending on the severity, but more times than not, it's the first step in success is, messing up on something, learning. Nobody's perfect. Don't follow a perfect leader. I've been told by one of my supervisors at times, you never follow a perfect person. You follow the person that's rough around the edges, that's beat up, that's messed up, who's willing to admit they're wrong because they're used to having to say it.
Mhm.
Oleg, would you mind going back to Jessica's 7:34 p.m. remark?
Mhm.
And I would love everyone to take a second, read that remark, and then tell us what you think. She doesn't know. Melody, Mark, Oleg, Trip, do you know? Was she wrong? Or was she just blind? Both? Neither? DJ, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. It's always a special night when it's a DJ night here in the house.
So I I think personally, and the only reason why I share this, actually couple reasons. First is I feel like Jessica and I have had that conversation on one of the Saturday calls that we host, but the other one is because I've been in those situations before. I've been in situations where I've ended certain relationships for a variety of reasons. I've also been on the receiving end of that. I've been on the receiving end of when relationships ended and I was left there with, well, why did it end? Why can't we continue? What happened? What did I do something wrong? Did they do something wrong? So I've been in both of those situations. How I process that, especially when it comes to my own decision of ending a particular relationship, is I really try and look at it through the lens of right now, at least in knowing what I know, is it serving me, and am I serving them? If I can't clearly articulate the two, I feel like that's where I choose to end the relationship. Now, is it wrong to do that? Is it wrong to assign value to everything? I actually just had a conversation like this with my cousin this past weekend, where I told her that one of the things that I'm genuinely passionate about is understanding that I'm using my time to the best of its ability. And I'm not saying measuring every second and trying to calculate the impact that every single action has, but more so just internally feeling that, okay, I've done the best that I could when it comes to any set of circumstances. So in that case, I have felt before that I was wrong for ending some of these relationships, especially the closest ones, because of the societal expectation. I mean, if we're being realistic about this, I think one of the things that society puts on many of us is if it's blood related, that's not even the topic of conversation. You can't end a relationship like that. You can't put somebody out of your life when it comes to family. You're always family. So I don't subscribe to that particular theory. I more so subscribe to the theory that we all started as strangers. We are all in a way still strangers. And that has helped me tremendously in being able to look at each one of the people as people, rather than things that I can't possibly separate myself from for whatever the reasons might be. So long story longer, I used to view it as wrong. I don't anymore, but that's only because I have, I don't know, I found a way to justify the answer to myself.
Jessica says we all have that one cousin, by the way. I've got a lot of them, Jessica. Okay, Bodie, I just barged in. Go for it, man.
I was going to say I've been in relationships that have ended, and I've looked back and I was wrong. I had messed up on something, and sometimes after the fact. For that, I took it as a learning experience, and it obviously you factor in emotions and stuff, so it hurts. But even looking back, I factor learning experience. But then one of the things that I was going to ask y'all about is how do y'all handle a situation where someone tells you something about somebody, and they kind of go off what Jessica was saying. You're kind of blind by it. You don't want to see it, but then you end up being wrong.
Because you ignore what you were warned about.
Oleg tells me,
like
don't
what
trust
you told
Scott
me about
Mason.
Scott yesterday. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
and I'm like, no, I don't believe it. Scott's a good guy. But then I find out, like, oh my gosh, Oleg was right. But Oleg's been telling me, over and over and over again. How do you handle those situations?
What I try and do, and Scott, I could have swore I had this conversation with you once upon a time
about me.
Exactly.
Yes, about you. There are certain things that are yet to reveal themselves, so we don't know who's right or wrong in those situations. But now, going back to your point, so I've been in those situations quite a bit, and I will tell you this, that for quite some time I would take the person's opinion of someone else at heart. So if I met Scott for the first time and I trusted you, Bodie, and you told me that, okay, Scott is never on time, he's not trustworthy, he's X, Y, and Z. None of those are true, by the way, just a disclaimer. But I would take that. I would take those things and I would base my relationship or the future of my relationship with him based on the things that you shared. Over time, I have learned that in situations where someone tells me that, okay, I just met with X, Y, and Z, they were late, I couldn't trust them, they didn't follow up, blah, blah, blah. I take that, but I take that with a grain of salt because I don't know what the person was going through that day.
Yeah.
That person might have had the most difficult day in their life. Something might have truly happened that completely disrupted their day-to-day operating system. So that's what I'm trying to focus on now. And so I will take that phone call. I will still go to that meeting in order to create another opportunity for another person. Because let's face it, I know I try and don't use we, but I think this is an appropriate situation. When have all of us not had a situation like that in our lives where circumstances were so difficult? And how would it feel for you if you weren't given a second chance?
I agree.
What if you lost a loved one and you had a
Mhm.
speaking engagement or you had to teach the following day and you just couldn't pull it together?
Yeah,
Do you think
no.
they should not give you a second chance after that?
One time when I was in college, someone came up to me as I was coming back from the funeral. Literally, I was walking back from the funeral of a friend of mine who had killed herself. And he decided that was the moment to tease me. Didn't go well.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't go well. Now, he may think, I think I did explain, look, this really wasn't the best time to poke the bear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But, he also, for all I know, he may have thought Scott is the biggest, most foul mouth, all this sort of thing, jerk that there is in the history of the world. And he didn't know this. I was not in control of my faculties. And I don't know, as much as we all like to say we can control our actions, at that age and stage in my life, I wasn't there. My friend killed herself.
Yeah.
And I was just at this funeral where I was absorbing the fact that I would never see this person again, ever. So I wasn't in a place. I was at my worst moment, and it came. And I would never want to be judged by that, ever.
Yeah.
Ever. I regret it to this day.
Well, I also really like what Bodhi had said, and I hope we can expand upon it even more. And it's this concept of really just embracing being wrong or failure as an opportunity to learn, like Melody had said at the beginning of this. Now, don't get me wrong. Maybe there's certain situations where we don't have to relive in order to understand that, okay, this was not a decision with Chernobyl. We don't need to experience that again. Hiroshima, we don't need to experience that. There's a variety of events that I feel like we as a society don't have to experience again to see what is the consequence of those particular actions. But I will say, like, sitting in a classroom of my 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I mean, all the way through high school, some moments in college, and receiving a test score back, not getting that grade, or getting a paper back and just seeing nothing but red ink, and then internally thinking, man, I'm a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should drop this class. I've done that. I've dropped classes because of things like that.
Yeah, I did too.
And look, 7 years later, 8 years later, I'm still talking about that experience. So why have I not embraced it as a learning opportunity? To be honest, because I don't think there has been a safe place to do it until I chose to create it myself. Until I chose to find other people with whom I can share these experiences with and whom I can relate. In school, it wasn't like that. I didn't have the opportunity to go back to the teacher and say, okay, wait a second. Is there another thing that I can learn from your red ink here? No, the red ink meant do over or you failed.
No
You don't get
questions.
to go on to the next step. No questions asked.
Yeah.
So that for me it's a really interesting concept where I think education, it's on the back of many people's minds, and yet when I really think about how many of the things are still taught in elementary school, middle school, high school, alternative education, maybe colleges, it's the same exact pattern. Think about how different it would be, Bodhi, if in your case when you got that piece of paper completely covered with red ink, you can go and ask questions. Not even a redo, not even a better grade, but just try and understand, like, well, what is a complete sentence? That was my big thing, because I came here in 6th grade. I just wrote and run-on sentences. But if you were to ask me what is the difference between the two, I couldn't even tell you.
Yeah. I'm not trying to toot our horn at the school that I work at, but one thing is we have a lot of flexibility with how we've adjusted our course. And one of the things is when we started going over our rubrics, we actually took off failed, anything like that, and we changed the verbiage to needs improvement. And we started just providing feedback to people. So I'll screw up as an instructor. I'll do it intentionally to them. And I'll say, hey, look, I just messed up on something. Wow, let's learn from this. But even providing feedback, people are so afraid of it because they're afraid that they're going to be told they're not doing something right, that they're wrong about how they go about it. And we've created this culture to where feedback is essential. You have to have it. You're there to learn. That's the whole purpose of you sitting behind a desk, is to learn. Nobody goes to a class because they know everything. And throughout, we instill this mindset of being wrong challenges us, because if you know that we're going to be talking about splitting atoms tomorrow on a podcast, what are y'all probably going to go research all night long? Splitting atoms, because you don't want to be wrong, and it actually challenges us. So we've kind of changed the mindset at our school, because we wanted to kind of break people from that, K through college really mindset of, red ink, just as Jessica says right there, not having stuff highlighted, not having stuff corrected for us. So that was definitely one of our challenges we did. And we've noticed, we've embraced be wrong, learn from your mistakes. And they've enjoyed it a lot. I don't know how their college experiences were. They didn't speak too highly of them, the ones that have come through, but we've gotten good feedback from it.
I love the idea, by the way, that Jessica mentioned in her 812 comment of a fail coach. That is something, I hope that person, Jessica, is doing well, particularly in corporate America or in other large organizations, because there are a lot of people that need that. I would even say I needed it during different times. And I certainly have had bosses that have needed it, because their fear of being wrong or being perceived as wrong would cause them to instill absolute abject terror in those underneath them, or even abuse them. And that's learning how to cope with being wrong, learning the survivability of it. There was an agency that I worked at where the solution at the executive level to any performance issue was to just fire the person. Firing. And there was a rumor that eventually the highest levels of city government got involved, stepped in, and told the leader of this particular agency to stop firing people. It was enough is enough. And, the fear of being wrong had real consequences for people there. And it was rooted, Oleg, as you mentioned, in true potential economic, in your case at the orphanage, you were talking about psychological and even physical damage. In the case of these individuals, becoming unemployed would have serious financial consequences for them, not the least of which is, for a lot of them, I think there was a hidden fear that as government workers, if it got out that they were fired, they'd be employable nowhere, because there was the idea, God, you can't even make it in government, when really there was nothing wrong with them. They just made a mistake, and this leader's position was just fire everyone. I know people that where that happened, they struggled for years to get another job. But that being said, it goes as to the reason why I mentioned that now in the context of this fail coach is, well, maybe though the fear of losing that job coming true activated the confirmation of the worst of those fears, so that people were paralyzed and not really able to truly bring themselves into the reinvention process that can happen when you are wrong and embrace it. There's an EDM song by a group called Arizona. It's called "I Was Wrong."
I
It's
was
one of my-
hoping one of these days you could name a group or a band that I'm somewhat familiar with.
Are you familiar with Arizona?
We are going to have a greatest
My-
hits based off this one episode.
Definitely.
My list just keeps on growing and growing. Starting with Donna Summers, I'm like, who?
Donna Summer.
Summer. Okay.
You
Summer.
were wrong. And so, hold on. I should have turned off my phone, and I didn't. I was
Now
wrong.
he's
You were
wrong.
No, you're wrong.
We make sure nothing's going to happen on my end.
Yeah. So, in any event, when the song's chorus is sung, the loss that the singer is expressing when he says the simple words, "I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong." This is someone who believes that the mistake he had created something that was genuinely irrevocable. Someone whose worst fear was being realized.
Well, so I'm curious if the two of you experienced this, or Jessica, or anyone else that's tuning in that's in the role of, let's say, being a podcast host and a podcast guest. I think Casey brought this up during one of the Friday conversations we were talking, and he said something along the lines of, "What if we're wrong?" And it really kind of piqued my interest as far as it made me think a couple things. First, being on a stage like that and knowing how just naturally the things that I used to think a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago are no longer the same things that I think today, or how I think about them. And it really got me curious that in being in these particular situations, such as the one we're in right now, what if we're wrong? What if we're wrong about how we share certain things, what we share, how people interpret them? How do you process that? That every time you get on a public stage, whatever that is, encounter at a grocery store, physical stage, the classroom, what if you're wrong? What if however many years or days down the road, just like Bodhi, for you is minutes, the situation that you described. What if you are wrong and you don't get the opportunity to correct?
Look at social media. Somebody messes up, they will let you know you are wrong.
Instantly.
In a heartbeat. They will
Scott,
go crazy.
I think you brought up that example one time with this, was it suspenders? Or some photo you put out there, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was Scott. Yeah.
You were wrong, according to them.
Oh, my God. Right. I learned from that mistake.
But in all seriousness, what if you are wrong? You ever think about that?
Yeah. So you're still referring to like podcasts, like if we get on here and we deliver an episode.
Anything you're saying, how you're sharing it. However long from now you're gonna figure out, like, damn, I was wrong for saying that, or for saying it that way.
Yeah, I think with that, you have to own it if you're wrong. I think that's something. I mean, it depends on what it is. If it's something that, if I mispronounced a word or something and somebody tells me that I was wrong, yeah, okay, won't happen again. Thank you. Learning experience. But if it was something where I drug Scott's name through the dirt and wasn't even, didn't know, but then now that has an impact on him. Yeah, I think you definitely have to own up to that and try to correct it as much as possible. But gosh, now I'm thinking of all the episodes I've had and going back. Good thing is I let other people share their story, so I can't mess up too much, except when I'm on here with all of you. So,
but even that's not quite true, because there have been situations where someone has said something that people later find out about and it's offensive, and the person on the video conference or the show with them didn't say anything
or agrees to it, just nods. Yeah, very true. Now I'm going to go back and listen to every episode.
Well, I'm just going to have to cross my fingers and hope that I'm forgivable.
Yeah. I'll start with your 2 episodes.
Would anyone ever be wrong, Oleg, if they looked at the commercial that you're about to show and decided to buy one of those things that are on those commercials?
I think they would be above the category of being correct. Is that a thing?
I think so. The highest level beyond correct.
Mr. Mason, while we're on the topic of right or wrong, where can people find the t-shirts and actually buy them?
Spectrum Design, its website is right in the scroll below this. And for those of you who may not be aware of exactly what Spectrum is, it is a t-shirt and apparel printing company. They also do embroidery and some other promo merch that employs almost exclusively people on the autistic spectrum. People on the autistic spectrum have something like a 90% unemployment rate. Spectrum Designs gives them real, meaningful career path jobs. The CEO of that company, Patrick Bardsley, has been a guest on this show as well as both the podcasts of Oleg and myself. He is truly passionate. But these shirts you don't want to buy just because they are charitable niceties. They actually do high quality, best of class work. It's an amazing company.
I can't wait to try one on. Literally in the week. Exactly
Yes,
a week.
you will. And pretty soon, at least 2 of our regular audience members will be wearing one, and Trip and our other regular co-host, Casey Berman, will have one as well.
Would it be wrong of me to ask either of you, maybe starting with you, Scott, where can people find out more about what you do on a day-to-day?
It would not be wrong. I'd be grateful. And I will start this one. You can find out more about me at purposehighway.com. That is not only my general homepage, but it is the homepage specifically for my podcast, Scott Mason's Purpose Highway, which examines new and interesting movements for people connecting with each other through the search for meaning, as the old pathways for building communities dedicated to ethics, purpose, and spirituality are in decline. We are in an exciting era in human history when it comes to the search for meaning and building connection. If you're ready to find out where the future is going, tune in to scottmasonspurposehighway.com.
Bodie?
Yeah, absolutely. Check out The Shadows Podcast. Our website is www.theshadowspodcast.com. Every Monday, we have brand new episodes. The guys over at Llama Lounge just took over our 50th episode. But we also have Rise from the Shadows, which is like a 15, 20-minute episode. It's almost like TED Talk form. And it's people talking about overcoming some sort of adversity that they've had in their life. Very motivating. So definitely check that out. We have all kinds of spinoffs. Ignite podcast is coming back for season 2 with Caleb Pearson, which I expect him to be on the chat next week. He's been gone long enough. And then we also have Off the Air, which Off the Air is like it's like a bush league, just a squirrel looking for the nut. It's like a 15, 20-minute episode where we take a concept and we do that once a month. And last week we actually recorded it. Our topic was ego. So it was a pretty good topic to discuss. But yeah, check us out. Go like us on Instagram, or follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, and give me some feedback. Tell me where I'm wrong, or otherwise I'm not going to learn.
Absolutely. Oleg,
awesome.
Talk about yourself. It's wrong if you don't.
For me, the place where people could find much of this, as well as the upcoming journey that I'll be taking in the next week, 10 days to be exact, it's called Overcoming Odds. And it would be wrong if you type the URL overcomingodds.today, which is not, or .com. It is .today. So people can go on there and find the different conversations, including the 2 of you who have been relatively frequent guests throughout that particular show, and just everything that we've been building as far as helping people create their own personal narrative and really live the story that they want, live the story that they aspire for. So Overcoming Odds, that's the space. And just outside of that, I want to thank the 2 of you personally for being a part of this, being a part of my life. And I want to thank Jessica. And I actually would like to share a brief thing about her event that Overcoming Odds will be a part of. So on the bottom, it's December 4th. There will be an event called a Musical Evening of Giving through an organization that she's a part of called the Breakthrough Show, where there will be a variety of musicians and I think other artists as well who will be putting together quite the performance. And so I know that the two of you are connected with her and probably have mutual respect as I do. And so I just wanted to briefly include that for anyone who wants to support. And I think the best way to support it is to purchase a ticket for the experience, but I'll also let Jessica tell other ways that people can support in case they're not able to attend on the 4th.
And Jessica, thank you for letting the world know that if they're not watching us, they're in the wrong.
Yes. It is very important for us to be right. I'm kidding.
All the time.
No, I think I want to thank once again the two of you and everyone else, and I hope that everyone else chooses to tune in next Thursday, including Caleb Pearson, because that would be wrong of him not to do it.